Imagine sitting on a plane, minding your business, when suddenly, you're slapped by the very person hired to serve and protect you. Now imagine being that person, and also being the CEO of the airline. This isn't a movie script, it actually happened. And what followed shook the entire aviation industry. The hum of engines filled the cabin, blending with the soft chatter of passengers buckling their seatbelts and flipping through magazines. It was a full flight from Atlanta to New York, the usual crowd. Business professionals with laptops, students returning from break, and families headed for a city adventure. Everyone was ready for the quick, 2-hour journey. Nothing out of the ordinary, except in row 7. There sat a man, tall, composed, and dressed sharply in a charcoal gray suit. His salt and pepper hair framed a wise, calm face, the kind of face that had seen struggle and earned every line. He sat by the window, quietly reading a hardcover book. No phone out, no tray table down, just a peaceful moment before takeoff. And then she came. The flight attendant, young and white, stormed down the aisle with clipped footsteps and clenched jaws. Her name tag read Kelsey, but the look on her face said something else. Frustration, maybe even anger. Her lips were pressed tight, her eyes locked on one person, the man in row 7. She halted beside him abruptly, one hand on the seat, the other gesturing sharply. "Excuse me, sir," she snapped, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I told you to store your laptop." Heads turned. The man blinked, looking up from his book with calm eyes. "Ma'am," he said in a steady, respectful tone. "It's already off and stowed." He pointed down to his leather bag, neatly zipped and tucked under the seat in front of him. But that wasn't enough. She didn't even glance where he pointed. Instead, she rolled her eyes and leaned in closer. "Sir, I saw you using it. Don't lie to me," she said, her voice rising. The man frowned slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. "I'm not lying," he replied, "but you're welcome to check if you'd like." Without hesitation, he bent down and reached to unzip his bag, calm as ever. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He was just trying to cooperate. That's when it happened. In a split second, faster than anyone could react, the flight attendant slapped his hand away. Hard. A loud smack cut through the hum of the cabin. Gasps followed instantly. A woman across the aisle covered her mouth. A man in the back muttered, "Whoa!" Phones started coming out. At least one passenger hit record. The man pulled his hand back, stunned, staring at her as if trying to process what had just happened. "I told you not to move," the attendant barked, now visibly shaken but still trying to appear in control. He stared at her, not with rage, not with fear, but with a deep, quiet disappointment. The kind of look that says, "I've seen this before. I thought we were past this." The cabin had gone silent. The other passengers knew what they had just witnessed wasn't right. Not even close. A man calmly following instructions. A woman reacting with hostility, with violence. And for what? Skin color? The assumptions? The stereotypes? The man said nothing more. He sat upright in his seat, rubbed his wrist where she struck him, and took a long breath. Then, almost casually, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Not to record, not to call, but to write. What no one, not the flight attendant, not the captain, not even the passengers, knew was that this man wasn't just another flyer. He was Mr. Harold Bennett, the CEO of the entire airline. And in that moment, seated in coach among strangers, slapped in front of dozens of eyes, he knew what had to happen next. He opened his email app and began typing. Not to complain, not to lash out, but to hold the system, his own system, accountable. Because sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you least expect. And sometimes the loudest message isn't shouted. It's quietly sent from row 7, by the man no one bothered to ask about. His name was Mr. Harold Bennett. To most of the people on that flight, he looked like just another older gentleman in a tailored suit. Refined, calm, maybe a retired professor or an executive heading to a meeting in Manhattan. But what no one realized, not even the flight attendant who had just slapped his hand, was that Mr. Bennett wasn't a regular passenger. He was the CEO of the entire airline. Yes, the very same airline they were all flying with that day. The one whose logo was printed on the safety cards, stitched into the uniforms, and displayed proudly on the side of the aircraft. He had built that company from the ground up. From the beginning, his mission had been bigger than profits. He had wanted to create a company where everyone felt respected, where people of color were not just passengers or workers, but leaders, decision makers. That's why today he was in coach, not because he had to be, but because he chose to be. Mr. Bennett often flew without the luxuries he could easily afford. No first-class seat, no entourage, no special treatment. He believed in staying connected to the people, to the experience, and to the real culture of the company he ran. He believed that if you really wanted to understand your business, you had to sit where your customers sat. But today, that belief was being tested in the most humiliating way. There he sat, the CEO of the airline, being scolded and slapped by one of his own flight attendants, simply for trying to explain himself with calm and respect. And all because of how he looked, because someone saw a black man in coach and assumed he didn't belong. Still, Mr. Bennett didn't yell. He didn't flash his ID or announce his title to the entire cabin. No power move, no retaliation. Instead, he quietly pulled out his phone and began to type an email directly to the board of directors. Not out of anger, but out of responsibility. If this could happen to him in his own airline, what was happening to other passengers? Or to employees who didn't have his status? That was the question burning in his mind. And so, Flight 417 became more than a flight. It became a story, a lesson, and a call to action. Because when a black CEO gets treated like a criminal on his own plane, it reminds us all that the sky isn't always the limit, especially when the weight of bias is still dragging us down. The airline didn't waste time. Within hours of the video going viral, they issued an apology. But behind the scenes, a lot more was happening fast. The flight attendant in question was immediately suspended, pending a full investigation. The footage was reviewed, witness statements were taken, and internal conversations became intense. It wasn't just about PR anymore, it was about accountability. Just a few days later, the airline released an internal memo to all staff. In it, they confirmed that the flight attendant had been terminated for violating the airline's code of conduct, passenger safety protocols, and expectations for professional behavior. For many, that might have been the end of the story. But Mr. Harold Bennett, the man who had been humiliated in front of a cabin full of passengers and millions online, didn't let it stop there. He knew this moment was bigger than him. He understood that while he had the platform, the position, and the power to speak up, most people didn't. Especially not the countless black travelers who had faced quiet acts of bias every day, from side eyes at security to rude treatment by staff. So instead of disappearing into the background, Mr. Bennett stepped forward. He announced the creation of a bold new initiative within the airline. Fly with respect. This wasn't just another corporate campaign. It was a company-wide movement. The initiative included mandatory racial sensitivity and de-escalation training for all flight crew and ground staff, improved hiring practices with a focus on diversity in leadership roles, a clear zero-tolerance policy toward any form of discrimination on board, monthly town halls where employees and passengers could share concerns and experiences directly with airline leadership. The announcement made headlines again, not because it was flashy, but because it was genuine. People could feel it. This wasn't just damage control. It was personal. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Bennett went further. He held a closed-door listening session with former flight attendants, especially those who had left the industry due to toxic environments. He met with activists, travel advocates, and community leaders, seeking input on how to make flying safer, fairer, and more respectful for everyone. He even created a passenger equity council, a group tasked with reviewing and recommending policy updates based on real traveler experiences, especially from underrepresented communities. But one of the most powerful moments came when Mr. Bennett made a surprising gesture. He reached out to the young woman who had filmed the video, the same passenger who had leaned across the aisle and whispered, "You didn't deserve that." Her name was Amaya Green, a 21-year-old college student flying home from a campus visit. Mr. Bennett personally invited Amaya to the company's upcoming diversity leadership meeting, a high-level gathering typically reserved for executives and department heads. In his invitation letter, he wrote, "You were a witness with courage. You didn't just record an injustice, you reminded the world that silence is a choice. And in that moment, you chose truth." Amaya attended the event, where she received a standing ovation and was later offered an internship in the airline's public affairs department. Her story became a symbol of how one act of bravery could help shift a company's culture. Meanwhile, employees across the airline, many of whom had stayed silent for years, started to speak up. Letters poured in, messages of support, of shared frustration, of hope. Mr. Bennett read every one. The man who had once sat silently in row 7 was now using his voice louder than ever, but with grace. He didn't attack. He didn't gloat. He led. He often repeated a phrase in his public appearances. One bad flight doesn't define an airline, but how we respond to it, that defines who we are. Under his leadership, the company began to rebuild its image, not with flashy commercials, but with real action. Customer satisfaction rose. Staff morale improved. And slowly but surely, people began to see the airline not as the company from the viral slap video, but as the one that chose to grow from it. Flight 417 may have started as just another route from Atlanta to New York. But what happened on board turned it into a symbol, a turning point, a reminder that change doesn't always come from protests or politics. Sometimes it comes from a man sitting quietly in coach, choosing dignity over drama and action over anger. And in doing so, he changed the altitude for everyone. Mr. Harold Bennett never planned for any of this. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't trying to make headlines. That morning, he'd simply boarded a plane, like thousands of other passengers, with the hope of a quiet flight and a couple of chapters from the book he was reading. But what happened that day? It exposed something deeper. It wasn't just a single act of disrespect. It was a crack in the system, one that's been there for decades. A moment that showed, no matter how successful a black man becomes, the world doesn't always see his success, just his skin. Mr. Bennett had spent his entire career building something meaningful. He'd fought to make air travel more inclusive, more humane. He had personally pushed for diversity in hiring, representation in leadership, and policies that treated passengers with respect, not suspicion. And yet, despite all that, on that flight, in seat 7A, he was treated not as a leader but as a problem. Not as a CEO but as a threat. All because of a snap judgment. All because someone didn't take a second to ask, to listen, or to see the man, not just the assumptions. But here's what makes this story different. Mr. Bennett didn't respond with anger. He didn't shout. He didn't reveal who he was in that moment to shame or scare anyone. He responded with strength, the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need to prove anything, because it already knows its worth. He responded with grace, even when grace hadn't been offered to him. And in doing so, he flipped the script. He turned a moment of personal pain into a catalyst for public change. He used the spotlight not to center himself, but to highlight the everyday experiences of black travelers across the country. People who don't have CEO titles, who don't sit on company boards, but who face the same kinds of silent indignities all the time. His leadership in the aftermath wasn't about saving face. It was about changing the culture. He didn't just call for accountability. He called for education. He called for growth. He reminded everyone watching, from corporate leaders to casual flyers, that dignity doesn't come from a title or a seat number. It comes from how you treat people, how you see people, how you choose to show up even when no one's watching, and especially when everyone is. In the days and weeks after the incident, the airline's policies were rewritten. Training programs were introduced. Voices that had been silent for too long were finally heard. And most importantly, a conversation that had long been ignored was now impossible to avoid. And as for Mr. Bennett, he went back to work, not with bitterness but with purpose. He spoke at schools. He met with young black professionals entering the aviation industry. He became a quiet force behind policy reforms, equity initiatives, and mentorship programs. And while the world knew him as the CEO from the flight video, Those who worked with him every day already knew the truth, that Mr. Bennett had always been a man of vision, not just for his company, but for what the skies could represent when flown with fairness and respect. And that young woman who filmed the video, she once said in an interview, "I just wanted to help. I didn't know who he was, but I knew what I saw wasn't right. Now I realize I recorded history." She was right, because the next time someone on a flight saw a black man in a suit, or a hoodie, or jeans and sneakers, they paused, they thought, and they remembered. They remembered that the man in 7A wasn't just a passenger. He was the CEO. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button. And if you want to hear more untold truths and powerful moments like this, don't forget to subscribe to Black Truths. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. This isn't just content. This is our voice, our truth, and our history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. The cabin, once buzzing with pre-flight excitement, had gone eerily silent. Whispers floated from row to row. Heads turned. People exchanged glances filled with concern and confusion. And guilt. A young woman across the aisle, maybe 20, maybe a college student, leaned over toward Mr. Bennett, clutching her phone. "Sir," she said softly, "I recorded everything. You didn't deserve that. I just wanted you to know." Mr. Bennett looked at her with warmth in his eyes. He nodded gently, the corners of his mouth curling into a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you," he said. "It means a lot." In that moment, something shifted. The tension in the air gave way to a quiet solidarity. The people around him weren't just witnesses anymore. They were becoming allies. People who had seen injustice and felt it. Not through words on a screen or news clips, but in real life. In front of them, the flight attendant, realizing the eyes on her, backed away. Her expression shifted from power to panic. She hadn't known who he was. She hadn't cared who he was until now. But the damage was done. Mr. Bennett didn't bother with eye contact. He didn't need to. He finished his email, hit send, and put his phone away. When the plane landed at JFK, things moved quickly. Before passengers could even unbuckle their seatbelts, 2 senior airline officials were waiting at the gate. They knew who was on board. They had read the email, and they weren't smiling. The flight attendant was immediately removed from duty for investigation. As Mr. Bennett walked calmly off the plane, passengers gave him knowing nods, some even small claps. Not because he had revealed his power, but because he had restrained it. Because he had shown dignity in the face of insult. And as he exited the jet bridge, a little girl looked up at him and said, "Mommy, is that a king?" Her mother smiled. "No, baby. That's a man who stood tall without standing loud." By the time the wheels touched down at JFK, something bigger than a flight delay was already in motion. The video, just 30 seconds long, had been uploaded to social media while the passengers were still taxiing to the gate. Grainy phone footage captured it all. The calm black man, the sharp slap, the stunned silence that followed. It was raw, real, and damning. Within minutes, it started spreading. First, just a few retweets, then a few thousand, then a few million. The hashtags were born fast. Hashtag flight shame. Hashtag respect black passengers. Hashtag he is the CEO. And just like that, the incident on Flight 417 became a flashpoint in a much bigger conversation about race, respect, power, and perception in America. On TikTok, reaction videos exploded. On Twitter, now X, celebrities, journalists, and activists all chimed in. "How many times do we need to see this movie before people believe us?" One post read, "That man showed more grace than I ever could." But the biggest twist came just 3 hours after the video went viral. The airline released a public statement, and the author of the statement, none other than Mr. Harold Bennett, the man in the video, the CEO of the airline, and the quiet force behind years of pushing for equality inside the company. The world watched as his name trended, and then they read his words. "Yes, I am the man in the video. Yes, the behavior shown was unacceptable, unprofessional, and deeply disappointing. And no, I am not calling for punishment. I am calling for change." People were stunned. He wasn't just issuing an apology. He was making a statement, one that would echo across boardrooms, airports, and homes around the country. Then came the part that lit up every news headline in America. When leaders like me experience what everyday Black travelers go through, it reminds us how far we still have to go. This isn't just about one flight attendant. It's about how we're seen, and too often how we're mistreated. With those words, Mr. Bennett transformed the story from a scandal into a movement. He didn't just defend himself. He stood up for every Black man and woman who had ever been disrespected, doubted, or dismissed on a plane, in a store, at a hotel, or in any space where dignity should be standard. Social media lit up again, this time with praise. People called him a class act, a silent lion, a leader we need now more than ever. Major media outlets requested interviews. Activist groups reached out. Employees of the airline, especially Black and brown staff, began speaking up about their own experiences. Many for the first time. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from within the company itself. The board of directors, shaken by the CEO's public stance, launched a formal review of internal training policies. A new human dignity and service initiative was announced within days, aimed at re-educating all staff, from gate agents to senior leadership, on racial bias, emotional intelligence, and conflict de-escalation. And Mr. Bennett? He didn't hide behind the scenes. He appeared on live TV, calm as ever. No anger in his tone, just firm truth. We built this airline to carry people, all people, with respect. If we fail at that, we fail at everything. Those words hit harder than any slap ever could. And what happened to the flight attendant? The airline confirmed she had been placed on immediate leave pending a full investigation. But Mr. Bennett, even after all that, made a final public request. Don't attack her. This isn't about one woman. This is about the system that let her believe that kind of behavior was normal. The internet, for once, listened. This wasn't just about a viral clip anymore. It was a mirror held up to an entire industry, and maybe to the country itself. A reminder that status can't always shield you, but grace can uplift you. That the quiet strength of a man in coach could carry more weight than any headline.